everyone, Dan and Steve here with sort of a pretty special celebratory episode of Yesshift. Not our anniversary, we did that about a week ago. But Steve, this is, I think, a landmark album we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so we're talking about the second Yes album, Time and a Word, released July 24th, 1970, and we're doing it a day early because that's just how our schedules worked out. But yeah, I'll also repost this tomorrow, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you get this feeling, but whenever I revisit Yes music, because of course I've listened to a lot of other things, but whenever I revisit Yes music, whenever I revisit Yes music, it kind of feels like I'm more focused on it when trying to soak it in for the show, and like everything else in the world is kind of like, it feels like I'm in a different time or something, if that makes sense. I don't know.
I get that. It's like a different listening zone, if you will. It's probably rarely, if ever, background music, right? You're listening to it to listen to it and not just for it to be there. And I have a bunch of music that I use for that, to just be there in the background on my laptop while I'm working, and it's great for that. I love that. But not Yes music. I can't get work done if there's Yes music on, because of what you're saying. It automatically draws me in, and I'm living that. Led Zeppelin music's the same way. I can't put that just like on in the background. I'm like in it. So I get that.
Yeah. I'm also kind of proud of the title I came up for this episode, 55 Years, Time and a Word about it.
Absolutely. 55 years is crazy. Yeah. I mean, what artist in their right mind then, now, and in between would come out with music and say, I think in 30, 40, 50 years, people will be enjoying this? Like, that's just myopic to think that way. But here we are, 55 years later, dedicating a whole show to it, and the music is still relevant and topical, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think it was Chris Squire who said that the Beatles didn't last more than a decade, so we thought we'd be fortunate to last that long. And lo and behold, many bands, even with personnel changes, have lasted that long.
True, but I really mean their music surviving the years, not necessarily a band being together. Like the Beatles' music is still, relevant and viable and out there and celebrated, even though the band, like Chris said, was only together 10 years. But that's really what I mean. For someone to come out with music at any time, even Chopin or Brahms or Bach, to say, in 50 or 100 years, people will still be, who would think like that,
Yeah, or cans and Brahms,
That's true. Beer cans and Brahms, the drunk version.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and give some context for when this album was made and came out. So this was recorded December 1969 through February 1970. And like we said, released in July 1970. Pink Floyd had released Uma Guma in November 1969. And recorded Atom Heart Mother from March to July for an October 1970 release. Two very divisive albums. People were really like, WTF about those,
Yeah.
The Moody Blues, which, again, happy belated birthday to John Lodge. I saw he showed a video of all the cards he got, which is really cool. The Moody Blues were recording their sixth album, A Question of Balance, which would be released in August 1970. King Crimson released their second album, In the Wake of Poseidon, in May 1970. Genesis recorded their second album, Trespass, in July 1970 for an October release. And Emerson, Lake and Palmer began recording their debut album in July 1970 for a November release. So it really feels like it was sort of a sophomore outing for a few of these bands, but you also had new stuff coming out, like ELP after the Nice had winded down and some other things. So it
The
kind
other
of
thing,
seems like a transitional era, doesn't it?
yeah, for sure. And the debut you mentioned. But the other thing is that out of all those bands, here's what's really interesting, I think. Out of all those bands and releases, this Yes album was probably the most accessible, I think, and may have had
Mhm.
music that got the most radio play at the time. And since, out of all those albums, what do we still hear? We still hear at least Time in a Word. I don't listen to a lot of radio, but I know that it's out there still, as opposed to anything from the ELP album, anything from King Crimson, certainly not Umakuma, et cetera, et cetera. But then you look at how quickly they morphed over the next 2 or 3 years into a whole different universe of music and became completely unaccessible to a degree. When you look at, like, they had Roundabout, which was huge, and Fragile did well, but then they put out Close to the Edge, and then they put out, it just went meow, like into a whole other wormhole, if you will. So I think that that's real interesting. I think, we know that part of the history, maybe I'm mentioning this too early. You can shut me up if I am. But being that Peter was fired, during or after the UK tour in 1970 for the album, then they brought in Steve Howe. I really think, and I know people will slam me for this, and I'm fine with that because it's all subjective. I really think if you take everybody that's come and gone, all the first time introductions of a new player to the band, yes, I think Steve Howe affected the greatest change. A lot of people might say Rick Wakeman, but Rick Wakeman wouldn't have joined. I don't know if he would have joined Yes if it was a Yes that carried on with Peter. Nothing against Peter, but being that Peter was ousted because of the differences of him being against using the orchestra, well, look how often Rick used the mellotron and whatnot. I just don't think that would have even happened. But Steve bringing all these other textures and instruments into Yes music, the slide guitar, the 12-string guitar, the Valtalia, all these different things. I think out of every player, he brought in the most first and the most and the first and the biggest effective change through their music that has lasted through all those years. What do you think? And chime in, folks. This is your show too. We're just the concierges. Is that plural, correct? Concierges?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I mean, Steve Howe has been with the band for so long, and contributed to a lot of what are considered their classics. So you might be onto something there.
And
I
molding the
Yeah.
sound that really became the Yes sound when you look at Frag songs like, let's just take a song from a few albums, Roundabout, And You and I, Sound Chaser, The Revealing Science of God, Going for the One. I mean, just right there, one song from each of those albums, even though in some ways a lot of them are so different from each other, is still Steve Howe. That's kind of that common thread of the sound, other than John's vocals, Chris's vocals, his bass playing. But Chris's bass playing was there like that in the beginning. So I don't know. I think that he affected the greatest change that lasted the longest.
Yeah, that very well may be. We're sort of, I guess we're sort of jumping around, but while we're on it, so the orchestra, I can understand. I understand Peter's frustrations with the orchestra because listening to the album again, and I think Tony might have also
Yeah.
not been so on board with it either. But listening to the album again, I think Tony stands out more than you might think if you heard the criticisms first. Like you hear him on stuff like Then and The Prophet, even on No Opportunity Necessary. But Peter Banks, like his guitar sound definitely could have stood out more in the mix. It's why I love that Beat Club performance where they play No Opportunity, and you can really hear him, and it's in black and white, and um
One
and
other thing to that,
yeah.
though, Steve, remember they were in their early to mid 20s. And when you quote made it then, and they were not making hardly any money at all. But the point is, Peter being a guitar player wanted to be in a rock band. What are we doing with a freaking orchestra? Like, I could see how that would be a point of contention just on the surface of everything. And it was for Tony to a degree, as well as using synthesizers and whatnot. He was more of an organist and piano player. But if you join a rock band to be in a rock band, and now the guys are talking about bringing in a string section, let alone a whole orchestra, I could see how that might gone against where his musical sensibilities and wanting to be in a rock band in his early 20s back then must have been like.
Yeah, and I think he had mentioned that, or someone mentioned, or maybe he mentioned that the Nice and Deep Purple had done the orchestra thing, the Moody Blues on Days of Future Past as well. And so it kind of, at the time, maybe it seemed like it was a trend, which is funny because nowadays, whenever I hear that a rock band is going to incorporate an orchestra, it piques my curiosity. We've had orchestral bits on the last couple of Yes albums, not the entire album, but these interesting instrumental passages, or maybe they'll be on top of something where I feel like they augment the music rather than try to be the missing musician or whatever, which was what Magnification very much was. Even though on Magnification they utilized it very well. In fact, I would be curious to hear like whether people think they prefer the orchestrations on Time and a Word or on Magnification.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I know that it's hard to ignore my own sensibilities and opinion on this. I can't imagine that Time and a Word would win out to Magnification, because like you said, the use of it does technically replace another musician. And it's done so well. You got Alan playing piano on 2 or 3 songs to kind of bring that element in, and it works so well on that album. That is really, I still think, such a brilliant album. I really do.
Yeah, whereas for Time and a Word, at least a couple of the songs had been played by the band before the album was made, and there are all these like BBC recordings where you hear the band playing it. So there are versions of that with just the 5 musicians that work really well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if they can work, any band that can make something like that work well both ways, like Deep Purple, like ELP, so many others, that just shows how, not just how great they are, but how great their music is. The fact that their music can add such a completely different element from another world of music, just like adding a choral group to sing and this background of something like No Opportunity Necessary, if you could imagine that, or Roundabout or something. You're bringing something in from a different world, and if your music works with that, that says a lot about the music.
Yeah, and for example, the song Dear Father, which was a B-side for Sweet Dreams, I think, for that single. The orchestral bits they added to that sound really good, but I also like the early versions that they did around the time of the debut album, where you can hear the guitar better, and so it kind of is like listening to a different beast, listening to those different versions that are available.
Totally. You want to go through the track list?
Yeah, so we have so it begins with No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed, which is a cover, Richie Havens cover, also co-written by Jerome Morose. Then we have Then, which to me feels like a proto Heart of the Sunrise in a way. It has a and it also has all this jazzy stuff as well, which makes it really cool. And then Every Days, which is another cover. Stephen Stills wrote that. And then Sweet Dreams, which I think is I think that and the title track are the most played songs from the album, you know, in the live setting. Um, Although I would say Sweet Dreams is maybe my least favorite on the album because it feels the most conventional, I guess you could say.
Interesting.
Um, well, it might be between that and this other track I'll mention in a moment. So on side two, we have The Prophet, which I was racking my brain, like doing research earlier, trying to remember this song about someone specific? I vaguely remember a John Anderson interview I read years ago where he mentioned someone, and in my head I was trying to remember, did he mention Bob Dylan or John Lennon? And so I found the October 1969 Melody Maker article where he mentions I wrote a song called The Prophet, which is about people following someone, and he tells them to, like, someone who has a big following, similar to Bob Dylan or the Beatles. People are huge fans of them, and so that's why I thought it was specifically about either them, when really I guess it's about someone with a similar type of huge following, and the person in the song tells them to, like, think for themselves. And so it's very pre Life of Brian in a way.
I was
Life of
gonna
Brian
ask.
very much,
That's
yeah,
funny.
Life of Brian, it feels very much like the pop culture artifact about that sort of
That's
message.
interesting. When we have John on again, we got to ask him that, because as you were saying all that, I was going to jump in and say, well, could it have been about Jesus? But then, of course, like you said, he says the
Like,
message is for them to think for themselves, even though they have a following. Enter the Life of Brian.
right. And then there's Clear Days, which is the shortest track, and it is a beautiful, if brief, track. It's possible that might go head to head with Sweet Dreams as my least favorite, but I do really love the orchestral bits at the end of it. The dun, 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 dun. And then we get Astral Traveler, which was Peter Banks's favorite Yes song to perform live, and it's when we saw Yes back in 2009, when they played with Asia, it was incredible seeing them play Astral Traveler, which they dug up the year before after so many years of not playing it. And Alan White even threw in a little drum solo in the middle.
Yeah,
So that was
cool.
amazing. And then we close with the title track, Time and a Word. And I like how the end of this version kind of has a reprise of the orchestra bits and No Opportunity, like or something like that. Like, it feels like a full circle type of thing, and it might feel like a simple song, but I do quite like the repeating of the sentiment. There's a time, and the time is now, and it's right. Like, I dig it, and how it fades out and whatnot. And David Foster co-wrote that, as well as Sweet Dreams. He's John Anderson's old bandmate from the Warriors. But yeah, do you have a favorite track on this album?
Yeah, I'd say it's between Astral Traveler and so my answer comes with a footnote. Astral Traveler and No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed. But I love the version of Sweet Dreams on the 35th anniversary show, Songs from Songus.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
that version. That the way they breathed new life into that, with Alan on drums, Steve on guitar, Rick on keyboards. I love that version.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite version of the song.
Yeah, me too. And I love Time in a Word, and I agree with you. It's the most accessible, the most sing-songy, the most commercial, but I love Astral Traveler. What are your favorites?
Yeah, I think for me, I know that for years, The Prophet was my favorite, and it's probably the most obscure one on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it didn't, it may have been performed once or a couple times by Yes, but then it wasn't performed again until 1980, when John Anderson was doing his Song of Seven tour with the New Life Band. It was part of this Yes medley. I listened to it on the Live in Sheffield CD. It's like 2.5 minutes. That portion, it begins after the instrumental intro on the album. But I think in recent years, Astral Traveler and Then have sort of risen a little bit above that. Um, it's kind of hard for me to choose between those two. Like Astral Traveler has such an edge with the I guess I'll give it to Astral Traveler, if only for that. It has a bit more extra stuff in it with a
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah, and I love the melody of the chorus, just the melodic line, astral traveler, ba 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 do da da, pom pom pom, da 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 da, pom pom pom. I just love the mechanics of the song. They're quite rhythmic, but then you got that sort of vocal line that does that over it. It's a nice mix, and I think it's really, if you look at it, listen to it under, where is it? Where's my magnifying glass? Someone took my magnifying glass. If you look at it listen to it under a magnifying glass, there's a glimpse of what's to come. If you look at the components of that and what Yes became over like the next 2 or 3 albums, I think.
Yeah. And I think that this album, well, first off, what was your experience with the material? Like, how did you discover the tracks over time? Like, what's been your journey with it?
Well, I experienced them over time and a word, first of all. Wait, what is this thing on? Tip your waitresses. Try the roast beef. It's great. Get the creamy horseradish. I honestly, because my entry point, and this is rare now, but I was very young then. When Fragile came out, that was my entry point. And I got into Fragile after Close to the Edge came out, but Fragile was my entry point. And then I went forward and I got Close to the Edge and Yes songs at the same time. I was like 12. And this was 72, 3, 4, whatever, something like that. But my point is, I went forward for so long. I don't think I ever listened to the first album or this album in their entirety until I was in my 50s. So like 10 years ago.
Or it might have been mid 40s when I got the CDs of them.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that's kind of weird if I even examine it myself. And it's only because the music is so different. For someone who fell in love with Fragile, then Close to the Edge, and everything forward from there that was so proggy, that these first couple albums were so much more, and people don't freak out, but really kind of in the vein of what was influencing the Beatles, Cream, the Yardbirds, and that early rock music of the late 60s, Vanilla Fudge, Cactus. And it just became something so different. And it's that different stuff I fell in love with first, that when I went back to this, it was kind of like, I don't know. It was just weird. It was just weird. So I'm not an immense fan of the first even 3 albums. Not, when I say not an immense fan, I don't mean in the way that like I don't like them. It's just not something I go back to. Like, not even Fragile, really. I love those, but any of those songs, put on a live version with the classic lineup and I'm listening to that. So some people might think that's crazy, but that's just been my big part of my Yes journey. That's all.
Yeah, that's funny, because I feel like I'd be more likely to reach for like either of the first couple albums than, say, like, I don't know, Going for the One or Fragile, really? Because they're more obscure.
Oh, interesting. But wait, I got to throw in a qualifier. When I mentioned why that's weird for me is because for the last maybe 20 years, if I hear something I like, I'll go to the beginning of the catalog and then go through that journey. With Yes, I just didn't. Or sometimes like with Haken, I went backwards.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. I see in the comments, AV says that's a roundabout way of thinking about it.
Well, it took a while for me to become awakened.
Yeah, and also asked, was Bill Bruford on this one? Yeah, Bill Bruford was on this one, and he actually spoke highly of this album in Chris Welsh's book about Yes. So yeah, like Bill at least was a huge fan of this album. You know, he got to do a lot of stuff with the drums here. My experience with the material, so in 2003, I got that compilation highlights the very best of Yes with a really strange looking cover. But it had a couple tracks from this first era of Yes. So it had Survival from the debut album, and it had Time and a Word from this one. Um, Although I guess technically that's the album version, but I would have also heard like the Beat Club version of No Opportunity on the Yes Years documentary and Sweet
Right.
Dreams in the QPR video. But yeah, that compilation was my first exposure to the studio version of anything from this album. And then in
You know what?
about
Wait, I always forget. I'm sorry, Steve, but I always forget that Sweet Dreams was on the QPR shows. Like that took me aback for a moment because when I think of Sweet Dreams, I think of songs from Songus, and I had to like rewind in my brain. Oh yeah, that is. But I just don't think of that song when I think of that show. I think of the Relayer stuff.
yeah, and
Oh, exclusively.
Trevor Rabin loved Sweet Dreams, so they dug that out for the 9012 live tour, even though it
Yeah,
wasn't on the video itself.
I know. I wish it was. I saw that tour, of course, and it was that I could see how that totally suits him wanting to dig into that. Yeah, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think it was in 2007, 2008, something like that. I was browsing more ES related stuff on YouTube, which is where I found that Rock in the 70s thing where it's the second lineup, you know, with Steve Howe in the band, because, you know, Peter was out of the band by then, but they still had to film those music videos of No Opportunity where they're in the car, Every Days where they're being chased by a nun for some reason. Um,
Yeah.
Astral Traveler, where it shows like this guy walking in a train station, and then where they're on like some sort of shore, and I think Tony and Chris had switched instruments or something for that video. And so it was really strange. Like I remembered seeing snippets of a couple of those videos in the Yes Years documentary, but this was like them in their full form. And then in 2009, there was that Lost Broadcasts release where it included that video of them miming Time and a Word. And so seeing that lineup, that original lineup in color for that was really interesting. But anyway, so in 07, 08, whenever I found those Rock in the 70s videos, was my first time listening to some of those other tracks. And I think a little bit later, you know, I was collecting the 2003, 2004 Rhino remaster CDs over the last few years before that, and I'm pretty sure Time and a Word and Tales from Topographic Oceans were the final ones that I got for my collection, and those are just very different albums. You know, Time and a Word is definitely a bit more experimental than the first Yes album, but Tales is even more leaps beyond that, you know.
Yeah. So how old were you then? Like 12?
I would have been 13, 14, something like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
When I finally got the CD, which includes the bonus tracks, you know, Dear Father and the original mixes of No Opportunity, Sweet Dreams, and The Prophet. I think for those, there's a bit. The difference I noticed on the recent listen was the backing vocals in places are maybe a bit higher, but other than that, I felt like, you know, at the time it felt to me like the bonus tracks, you know, out of all the re-released Yes CDs of the time, I feel like this one had the least amount of stuff for me to get out of the bonus tracks, whereas I got more out of the stuff for Tales, for Tormato even. But
Yeah.
you know, it was still satisfying to finally like add that to my collection.
Totally. Here's a couple other comments. Doug, watching live on Facebook, says, I feel Into Yes around 1975 and Yes songs are all freaking awesome. Yeah, those early to mid 70s are just as good as prog gets, in my opinion. And watching on YouTube, Michael Elliott says, Time and a Word, Sweet Dreams, and Then are fantastic songs. Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah, and earlier on one of the posts I shared around, I saw that David Patrick Kelly said, still hoping for Time and a Word naked version that will strip the orchestration and let Banks and Kay's parts shine through the mix. Yeah, I don't know what the technical possibilities are, like what's actually available, but if that is possible, that would be pretty neat to have.
Yeah, and that reminds me, let's talk about the album cover conundrum, because there
Yeah.
were two album covers, and the original UK version pictured basically a black and white drawing of a naked woman that's easy to figure out. It's not that explicit at all, but that was banned in the US. So they came up with the other album cover.
Yeah, for the US version, it's the second lineup. So Steve Howe is on it, which is awkward because he doesn't play on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I have the you know, the picture of the original lineup.
That's
But
just so weird, because how is it that they didn't have some promo shot with the five of them, including Peter, to use for that? It doesn't make sense. I get
yeah,
that.
because on the inside of the album there are pictures like individually, like individual profile shots of the band, and you also have the photo of them on the back that shows them like this. So it's like, why not just use that photo of them and put something else on the
Could have
back?
been the cover. Yeah, it's just weird. And
Yeah.
there's plenty of others. There's plenty of other pictures we've seen. So that's just strange. Unless it was a total slight to Peter. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but also I will say about the font that, so right here at the top of this, you know, I've included both versions of the Yes and the album title fonts.
Yeah.
The one for the UK where it says Time and a Word and a slash and a Yes, that looks too plain and unexciting to me, to be honest. Whereas for the US version, you know, setting aside the weird lineup photo conundrum, I think the US version did a better job with making the Yes logo and the album title look more interesting. Like you have the Yes logo in this black and white with these, it looks sort of kaleidoscopic within the letters, and Time and a Word has these shadows that make it stand out. So I think actually, that looks better.
Yeah, what I see, if you could magnify it, please, where it says Yes, that looks like Native American or Aztec type of pattern.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Right? And then the Time and the Word, when I see that with that real deep drop shadow that's just jet black, that is so representative of what the artwork looked like back then in the late 60s, and fonts and things like that. Very representative of the time. But look at the Yes words look like Mexican or Aztec or Inca or Native American, you know, just with all those shapes and stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I still had like the XOX Xeno album covers. Right. Cool conversation with Craig the other day.
Cool.
Yeah, but so what do you think could have been an alternative? Like, what else could they have used as the album cover if had they known that the Naked Lady cover would cause some issues overseas?
The style of that artwork you just referred to, but a big clock that maybe had like melting or wavy edges or something like that. That would have done it for me. That would have been cool. Just a big, weird clock.
Okay, yeah, because I do like the black and white theme. Like, for it really sticks to this album for
and the
me.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do
Um,
you think?
yeah, I was I don't know, maybe something like I think if it were me, I would have maybe retitled instead of naming it after Time in a Word, I would have named it after Astral Traveler, and you could have like maybe
Oh
some
yeah.
sort of space shuttle. And imagine if they had met Roger Dean at this point, he maybe we could have had the glider even earlier or
Oh
something.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. See, I didn't even think of terms like that. I was just thinking with the name Time in a Word. And I'm sure they used that as the title track because they knew at the time, especially with all the other albums you mentioned coming out, that it was the most accessible track. So they named it after the single, which again still endures.
Yeah, and Dave Walkinson, who's actually written a book about John Anderson and the Warriors, he says the best one is the one in the architecture salvage off the Fulham Road. Yeah,
Oh, I know what you mean.
I think he's referring to the one where they're standing around and there are these statues. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
cool one.
Yep.
Um,
Hey,
I
Dave. Thanks for tuning in.
I see Johnny A
No,
saying,
Johnny.
yeah, saying Uriah Heep cover art maybe. Oh, so are you saying one of the Uriah Heep covers could have worked for this, or that one of the things we're saying sounds more like a Uriah Heep cover?
What
Go ahead and
the
clarify that for us.
Yeah, what's the Uriah Heep cover with is it called The Wizard? The guy that
Demons and Wizards, I think it
Yeah,
is.
that'd be
Yeah,
cool for Astral Traveler if that was the name.
maybe. Yeah, I guess that because there are the stars in the background,
Yeah,
so maybe it doesn't need to be a spaceship. It could just be someone traveling like with the stars behind them. Yeah, maybe.
interesting.
Um,
What do you think the legacy of the album is?
so I think it's obscure compared to some of the other Yes albums. They only really dig out Time and a Word and Sweet Dreams the most. Although, like we mentioned, they dug out Astral Traveler for the In the Present tour. And maybe again since then, I don't know quite off the top of my head. They dug out No Opportunity Necessary for the Royal Affair tour, and that was incredible. I think they put it again a couple years ago. Um, and I think when they saw Total Ascertain perform that at a 50th anniversary event, that's what inspired them to dig out the song for the year after. So that's pretty cool.
So
Um, uh,
yeah, go ahead.
let's see. I already mentioned John Anderson digging out the Prophet in 1980, but these other tracks they're not played really like ever since this
Right.
era of the band, but people who talk about this album talk about how cool some of the stuff on those tracks really is.
Do you think that the remembrance or remembering of the album or the way people revere it or not would be affected one way or the other if A, it didn't have the weirdness of Steve Howe in the videos or the album cover, and B, it didn't have the two different album covers? Like, do you think that affected the legacy in any way?
I think the music speaks for itself, so I don't know that the different album covers would affect it, but I could see how maybe someone might not be, if the album is in a record shop or whatever, and whether it be the US cover or the UK cover, they might look at it and be not so sure about it and opt for something else that catches their eye.
Yeah, I
So,
wonder how hard that
yeah.
UK cover is to come by now.
Yeah, well, it's still on the CD. Like when it got re-released for the Rhino remasters, they went with the original UK cover for over here in the US. So, they weren't as opposed to it for that. But and Dave Walkinson I think has written an article on yesworld.com that shows a variation of the cover with different colors, which is yeah, it's an interesting article. But
Oh, I want to check that out. Send that, Dave. There he is. Dave says, here, I'll put it up. Dave says, yes, you dig deep into the first albums as they are generally short tracks. Sing along, yes, with a bouncing ball on a big screen behind them.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be like an educational sort of segment of a show, right? I like that idea a lot. Oops, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I just kicked the dog's face by accident. I'm sorry. I thought
Yeah,
we
and
could
I know you're not as familiar with the first two albums as I am, but would you say you have a preference between the first album and Time and the
this,
Word? And if so,
this
what
one.
would be
Yeah,
this
this
one?
one, and it's mainly because of my favorites: Astral Traveler, No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed, and even if we look at, I'd even throw in Then. There's just I think it's deeper. I think it's deeper, and there's a bit more of a wider
Yeah.
musical spectrum, if you will, where you really got to know them more, which is easy in hindsight. Like I said before, there's a couple of things that give us glimpses of what became their future, but I think the first one's a great effort. This just seems more expansive, and then again, the addition of Steve Howe and what started to come after that really showed that they were onto something. And George or Jorge says, also DJ White says, Then is my favorite from this album. Cool.
Mm. Yeah, I think I slightly prefer this album for similar reasons. It has the more off the wall instrumental bits in the middle of some of these
Yeah.
and feels more experimental, but I think the first album definitely has better bonus tracks, with the different versions of Something's Coming, Dear Father, and
Oh,
Every
yeah.
Days. um but yeah, I'm glad that we have two albums with the original lineup, and the albums are so different. I know we sometimes lump these two albums together because it's the same lineup, but they even though they have like similar structure, there are two cover songs, there are a couple softer songs and what have you, that they're still different enough from each other to stand out on their own.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and
Cool.
Johnny says after the first two albums, I would have liked to have seen a live album. Yeah, the closest thing we have to that is the BBC recordings compilation,
Yeah.
which is really cool to have. I have it somewhere around
Yeah.
here.
This is definitely worth getting, folks. This is
Oh
really,
yeah,
yeah.
the early TV broadcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
CD and DVD. And if you're, a DPS fan, this is a really good memento. Or if you're more of a latter years Yes fan, like the last 30 years, this is a great education too, to really see where they came from, the roots and all that. This is great. I'm happy with this.
yeah. And something also about this album, Tony Colton was the producer, but this was where they got Eddie Offord as the audio engineer, and
Yeah.
he had kind of a career with Yes after that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was that spark, that beginning. But 55 years, I'm still just blown away by all the amazing bands and albums whose music is still relevant that are 50 plus. It's pretty mind boggling.
Yeah, and something I forgot to mention earlier, we mentioned Emerson, Lake and Palmer also came out around this time. I think Tony's playing on this album. I know people often compared Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson as being up there, but Tony definitely deserves to be up there as well. He's another like really good on the organ on this.
Really great organist. You're right. That's a very, very valid point. Yeah, especially if you consider the time period. Because like back then, who was it? It was him, John Lord of Deep Purple, and then that was a different era. So I think it's important to often put things in context, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it is a bummer they had to let Peter go, but I do like what he was able to do on his solo and Flash stuff after this
Yeah.
album. So, he got to spread his wings on stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a shame that we lost him so young.
Yeah. But, we
Cool.
still got the music to remember him by.
Yeah. Happy
And
birthday, Time in a Word. 55 years.
yeah, and on that note, we've wound down the discussion on this album, but I feel like we should also acknowledge something that happened yesterday because it was so big in the music world, which was the passing of Ozzy Osbourne. And of course, Rick Wakeman and Adam Wakeman, I've worked with him, and he had such a huge impact on music. It was quite a shock to both of us, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I was surprised to read something I read this morning or last night from the family that said it was a surprise to them. They knew, of course, he was dying because of the level of Parkinson's he had and other things, but they did not expect it to be now. They thought they were going to get more time with him. So,
Yeah, it's just a couple weeks after the farewell concert. Yeah,
17 days. He gave it his all and was just, I think, ready to go. And that's what happens. I've personally experienced that before. When someone's ready to go, they just let go. And it's huge. I saw Ozzy, if I may, just real quickly.
Yeah.
I saw Ozzy on the Diary of a Madman tour. I saw him on the Bark at the Moon tour. And when I saw him on the Diary of a Madman tour with Rudy Sarzo on bass and Randy Rhoads on guitar, Tommy Aldridge on drums, Don Airey on keyboards with the big Castle set on stage. It was New Year's Eve, December 31st of 1981. And that was just amazing at the LA Sports Arena. And then I saw like I said, the Bark at the Moon tour. And I saw someone will correct me and that's fine, 1997, 98, when the original lineup first got back together, I saw that, and that was incredible. That was really, really good because by that time they were all in their, I guess, mid to late 40s. In my perspective, still pretty young, which is funny. And it was great. It was so good. And then, just an amazing solo career and an amazing goodbye. Like so many have posted, there'd be no insert 50 bands in heavy metal if it weren't for what he did on his solo work, but more importantly with Black Sabbath. It's just, they invented a genre. They really were not just the forefathers, the grandfathers of heavy metal music. And it's quite a legacy.
Yeah. All right. And, even Rick posted some words about him in this video he put up earlier. But yeah, like lots Carl of tributes. And yeah, Carl Palmer posted something too. Yeah. But yeah, lots of tributes. Of course, we always have the music to remember any of these people by, thankfully. So folks, go out and listen to some music, or you could stay in and listen to some music. Now that I think about it,
play it loud, play some Black Sabbath, some Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to put on Volume 4. That's my favorite Black Sabbath album.
All right. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to this discussion, and you can follow us at Yesshift on Facebook and YouTube, and you can also write to us via yesshiftpodcast@gmail.com, and keep an eye out for our whatever the next broadcast is. I know this past little while since our 4th anniversary, we've put out quite a lot thanks to a few of my reviews, but we'll dial it back a little bit so that's not too overwhelming perhaps. But
I think what we might do maybe for the next show is we'll dig into a bucket of a brain dump Stephen and I had a couple of years ago in San Francisco covering the Roger and Freya Dean art show. There's still some things there we haven't used, I believe.
Yeah, there's definitely one I want to get to soon. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks everybody so much for tuning in, and go ahead and write us, like Stephen said, at yesshiftpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts, and we appreciate you following what we do. Thanks,
everyone.